Hello, my name's Seamus Breslin and I'm currently the project coordinator for a group called the Friends of Derry City Cemetery. The Friends of Derry City Cemetery has a very interesting background, and that is around about 1995 when I was graduating. I was doing a master's degree and I called on the assistance of local historian Michael McGuinness to help me, and the project was about Catholics and nationalists from Derry that had fought in the First World War, World War I, or the Great War as it's also known. And at the time, it was sort of acknowledged here that it was basically like seen as a unionist war, and unionists wore poppies and unionists commemorated the war, and the unionists it was their war memorial and that. Not completely, but anyway. So we decided to research that, and the story that was uncovered was actually quite remarkable, and it was that there was a huge, massive nationalist Catholic involvement in World War I, and we basically established that there was a battalion or a group of men that left the Bogside as Irish nationalist volunteers. Now, I had heard of the Salford Pals, the Manchester Pals, the Hull Chums. I'd never heard of the Bogside Pals Battalion, and basically that's what they were. They left, they signed up in St Column's Hall, which was a Catholic hall rather than the British Army Barracks. They joined the Irish Division, the Irish Brigade of the Irish Division, and they were generally had very nationalist outlooks and thought they were going to fight for the rights of small nations, and they go and fight for poor little Catholic Belgium, like their own Catholicism and that. So the story emerged and we took it to the wider community, and for many, many years now it's been ongoing. So the project and the research went on, continued, and what emerged from it was a huge project called the Orange and the Green. Basically was saying Unionists went under the Ulster Division, the UVF, the Catholics the Irish National Volunteers, they went under the Irish Division, and so we had two stories of the Orange and the Green, which we merged together to tell the story of the city, especially on a spirit of reconciliation, that it was a shared history. So in the city in 1914, we had two armed camps here. We had the Orange side with the Ulster Volunteer Force drilling and training, and we had on the Green side the Irish Volunteers drilling and training and arming themselves, and it looked by the end of the year or there could be a civil war here between the two. But First World War broke out, and it ended up that the two sides went off to war, and they actually ended up fighting on the same side against the Germans. So the two sides signed up, and the Ulster Unionist side, the Ulster Volunteer Force, went off to fight for their king and for their empire. The Irish Nationalists went off to fight for the rights of small nations, Catholic Belgium. And after they joined up, it was ironic then that the Catholic Nationalist men, the Irish Volunteers, were sent down south, way down south to Cork, to Fermoy, to train, and the Unionists were kept up here in the north, at Ballykinler, even down at Bundoran. And people say that it was deliberate even to keep the two different factions apart. So it took the full year of 1915 for these civilians to be turned into soldiers, to be turned into a killing machine. And it seems from all the evidence that both sides were fearful that the war might be over by Christmas, and it might be over before they get their chance to take part. So off they went to war, trained up now, infantry soldiers, and they arrived in France as separate units. They had the 36th Ulster Division, we had the 16th Irish Division. Some of the reports, letters coming home before they actually saw any action, were very light-hearted, and they were on about not being able to understand the French language, but they could hear the sound of the guns in the distance. But that was all to change. 1916, for both sets of men that went off, was about to become a very bloody year. The blood started spilling for the divisions in July the 1st, the Battle of Somme. The 36th Ulster Division, the 10th Battalion in Enniskillens, mostly Unionist men here from Derry, went into action, and this city was hit with over 100 plus telegrams of men that had died, not only injured. Now remember, it was only a small city, and then this was only a small section of the Unionist community. Now people tend to forget, but the Somme continued as a battle for a long time, up until November, and in September we had them what we called Nationalist Derry's Battle of Somme. This is where the men from the Bogside went into action at Gilmont and Ginjay, and they suffered horrendous casualties too. There was 36 killed in the one day, and that from a small community. And so the reality of war had set in for these men that had left from the city in late 1914. So after the horrors of 1916, the year 1917 came in, and the units, the Orange and the Green, the Ulster Division and the Irish Division, started bringing in new recruits to replace all these casualties from the big battles in 1916. So basically then the story of these two groups that left Derry, the two factions, would come together at Mazines in June in 1917, where both the 36th Ulster and the 16th Irish were men from Bogside and that, men from the Fountain, the Waterside, knew each other, were side by side, going into battle, and they actually had a great victory at Mazines. And people thought that when they showed this courage and this cooperation and brotherhood, got into action in 1917 at Mazines, that maybe it could be a different Ireland that they returned to, and maybe they could work together. And that's probably why now we have the Island of Ireland Peace Park at Mazines, and we have the Mazines Peace Project. So after the Battle of Mazines in 1917, there was no major role in the war for the groups that had left Derry in 1914, and the war ended in November 1918. And many people say that the groups of survivors, the veterans, returned. They left one war behind them in Europe and walked straight into another war here back home, with the War on Independence, post-1916 rising in Dublin, and then the conflict with the partition of Ireland 1920, 21, 22, and the violence where we had inter-communal violence. People returned to their own community, and rather than being united, they were as divided as ever. Research from the men that returned home, the veterans, shows that a whole lot of them on all sides of the community divide were resentful at the fact that jobs that they'd left to go off to war weren't there when they came back. Sometimes it was just the young boy that had been the apprentice was now in charge, and some of them came back to find that their girlfriends had found somebody else where they were away. And there was communal things like that there, resentment that was universal to all the veterans. While researching the story of World War I in the city, we came across a multitude of stories, some of them very, very sad. And one of the most topical stories that sort of can relate to most people was the story of James Downey. James Downey had just been married, he had a young child, and you can see here his wedding ring, and this is his picture. It was made into a locket. And James went up and he signed up with the rest of the men in the Bogside pals. He signed up in the Irish Brigade, his Irish National Volunteer Company, and he signed up at St Colum's Hall, where ironically it says that anybody under 21 years of age must bring their parents' consent. And we know for a fact that there's a lot of 14, 15, 16-year-old boys signed up. Anyway, well, James went to France naively, like the rest of them, thinking Great War, hoping it wasn't over before they got there. He was one of the first to be injured in a place called Luz in the north of France. His injury wasn't very severe. He was shipped back to Guildford, and at Guildford he was to have an operation. There was a series of telegrams exchanged between the hospital in Guildford and his wife. Were saying he'll be okay, he'll be fine. But during an operation he had an embolism and he died. So the last telegram was very short, and it just says either bury your husband here or send his bodies home. So they had the consolation of his body coming home, and his body is now buried over here in Derry City Cemetery, overlooking the city where he was born. And as you can see, the family to this day have still got the telegrams, the postcard where his journey began up at St Colum's Hall, his medals for his service, and most poignantly, they have his wedding ring turned into a locket. So, as you can see, it's the story is there from the beginning, the middle, and the end. Another interesting story about the First World War was the story of George Lindsay. George Lindsay was a cyclist, very fit man, and it seems he went out at the Battle of the Somme. He was in the Ulster Division, and he went out to search for wounded comrades. Well, anyway, the story is interesting because George lived until the ripe old age of 103 years of age, and he's commemorated over here in the local cemetery, not far from James Downey. So we have the story of the war here right on our doorstep. Well, what's the difference between the two men and the two divisions, the two things? Well, I think we can sum it up whenever we look here and we see that most of the war memorials are the memorials for men from the Catholic nationalist community, say that they died for the glory of God and the honour of Ireland. And those for the Ulster Volunteer Force usually say, for God and Ulster. So the greatest manifestation of the First World War here in our city would probably be the War Memorial in the Diamond, which was opened in 1927. And for many years it was sort of like a source of controversy because people thought it belonged to the Unionist community. Well, recent research by Trevor Temple has saw that the split in Catholic Protestants on it, if it's worth mentioning at all, even as it's virtually 50-50, which a lot of people found surprising. But in the 1930s, the Derry Catholic Ex-Combatants Association would have paraded to the War Memorial. They'd have paraded to Mass around a packed bogside with flags waving and bands beating and that. And they would have wore things on their lapels. And people says, what would the reward in their lapels? Would it have been poppies? But it wasn't. It was oak leaves, and it wasn't 11th of November, Remembrance Sunday. Whenever they went, it was St. Columba's Day, so they marched on St. Columba's Day with oak leaves. That faded away, and we're proud to say now, partly due to this project, that the vandalism and the political slogans that used to be on the War Memorial now are largely gone. The gates have been reopened and sort of accepted now generally by the community as being the city's War Memorial, not belonging to anybody in particular. So I'm proud to say that the orange and green on our World War I project just didn't end there, because a lot of research was done by myself from the Craigan and Trevor Temple from the Fountain, obviously from the orange and the green, the Unionist and the nationalist community, and we spent a lot of time in Derry City Cemetery doing research, and it's whilst doing that we noticed vandalism and general disrespect. But most of all, Trevor was communicating to me that there were a lot of people from the Unionist community had a chill factor about visiting the city cemetery, and we thought that was sad because of the history that's there, the war dead, people from all communities, all walks of life, the rich, the poor. And so we now have merged on and have a very successful project now going called Friends of Derry City Cemetery, trying to create a safe, shared space, shared for all the community, and it's ongoing, and groups from all over the island, all over the UK, all over the city, young and old, have been coming over and starting to realise the unique, diverse, special history that we have right here on our doorstep. The height of the troubles here when I was growing up, it was shameful sometimes to look at the War Memorial and the Diamond in the city centre and see political graffiti around it and the paint bombs, petrol bombs, attacks on it, and poppy wreaths scattered in that. And in recent years, probably a lot to do with our project here on reconciliation and telling the truth, has led now to, I think, a far better environment where we can all now go and commemorate with honour and respect for our own particular reasons, for everybody's different reasons, but and show the respect to the World War I dead and the war dead in general at the War Memorial and the Diamond without any controversy. I'm sure it would be a nice honour to the men to say that we've made our peace too.